sensory deprivation tanks, flotation, what's now being referred to as flotation. I started regularly floating about 5 or 6 years ago. And for those who don't know what sensory deprivation, or what a sensory deprivation tank or a float tank is, that is a light-proof, sound-proof container that contains a saline solution, water and Epsom salts, that is temperature controlled to be roughly around the same temperature as your body, and is, as a result of the amount of salt in that water, is very buoyant. And you get into this tank, you float on your back, the tank door is closed, and it is a perfectly quiet, weightless, and dark environment, right? And as a result of this, you enter into a very deep state of relaxation. And while on this, if you were to describe this to someone, it sounds like it'd be a claustrophobic, scary kind of thing, but it really is the opposite, because of the way that you lose the sense of where the boundaries of your body are, due to the water being the same temperature as your skin, and due to the fact that you're floating weightless for the first time probably ever. There is this peculiar sense of being in a void that has no boundaries, and it is a very warm, luxurious, comforting experience, very womb-like. It recalls of the experience of being inside the womb on some level, I feel, because there is this warmth, there is this being floating in liquid. You hear your own heartbeat, right? But of course, what happens after being in the tank for a certain amount of time, it depends on the individual, is that you enter into a very strange trance-like state where the boundary between waking and sleeping begins to dissolve, where that transition point between wake and sleep, kind of that window opens up further and further, and ideally you begin to dream, you begin to enter into a visionary state while you are wide awake. And you begin to have all kinds of interesting, very psychedelic experiences. And the longer you stay in the tank, the more profound these experiences can become. I was lucky. I think the very first time I got into the tank, around the 20-minute mark, I had an extraordinary experience of just suddenly being unsure at first which way was up. There was this weird feeling like I wasn't sure if I was floating this way or that way or this way. I kind of lost all sense of which way was up. And then as a result of this, there's strange light. I became aware of this strange light, and this light changed from this very light sort of electric haze into this beautiful blue color, and then out of this oceanic kind of liquid that I could see, this extraordinary tree just rose up, and I was somehow aware that this was the world tree. Whatever that means, but in that moment, in that episode, I had the sense that this is the great world tree, and I could see the branches, I could see the bark, and there was this very luxurious, warm, loving sensation all along with this, where I felt like everything was going to be okay. There was this feeling that everything was whole, everything was held somehow in the oneness that is this tree. And that immediately, once that experience dissolved and I came out of the tank, I was hooked. I was really fascinated by the potential of what could happen inside this tank, that it is in fact very, very visionary, very psychedelic. And the parallel to the dark mirror, the scrying mirror, was the first thing that struck me. If you've ever worked with a black mirror, of course, it's a mirror that's black, and as a result, when you're scrying in that mirror, you do have the sense of peering into a void, and in that void, in that emptiness, then you begin to see images arise and various, if you're working with it during a evocation procedure, you will see spirits appear in it and so on. So the parallel to the black mirror was the first thing that struck me. But of course, this is like being inside the black mirror. This is like floating, weightless, suspended in warm nothingness inside this void. And it is a very nourishing experience. You climb out of the tank and you feel deeply rested physically, because for the first time perhaps ever, there's no input into your system, no sound, no significant pressure really, other than the water around you, and absolute silence. So your nervous system gets a really profound rest, and as a result, your inner experience becomes accentuated, becomes really, every thought, every bit of imagery, anything that arises in the mind becomes high definition, right? And for some people, this is in fact very uncomfortable at first. There might be a sense of struggle in the tank. There might be a sense of being confronted with the noise in your head. But if you can get past that, and ideally you will have relaxed, done some yoga, or maybe had a massage, or done something to first release the stress from your body before you get in the tank. But if you get past that, then you can slip into this strange liminal place where you're neither awake nor asleep, and you begin having these waking dreams and visions. And so immediately the potential, not just the visionary potential for self-exploration in the tank was something that struck me about this experience. It's completely natural. You don't need to use drugs. There's no psychedelic nothing that you have to consume to experience this, and it's really good for you. So that was a bonus. But the potential for it as a magical tool was something that struck me. And I've experimented with various things over the years, and I thought I would use this video to share some of my discoveries or some of the ideas. Maybe I can inspire you to try working with the sensory deprivation chamber in the same way. Now, the first thing, of course, that the tank or flotation is really well suited to is pathworking. Whether you are doing the traditional Kabbalistic pathworking using the tree of life, or whether you're using some other form of active imagination, whether it's just kind of free-form active imagination, or something more structured like the inner guide meditation, which is one of my favorite systems of active meditation on self-exploration. I've recommended the inner guide meditation, that book by Edward Steinbrecher, to so many clients and friends, and people must be sick of hearing me go on about that. And it's really one of my favorite systems of work in that way. It uses your natal chart, uses your horoscope as a map, and then you basically use that map to do pathworking using tarot cards. It's a whole thing. But I digress. Inside the tank, of course, pathworking takes on a whole new life. If you enter into that light trance that you need to do pathworking in any significant way, that what would otherwise may have been a very subtle experience if you were just doing it on your bed or whatever, now becomes high definition. You see everything. Your imagination becomes much more vivid, and you can really step into that experience as a full immersive thing. It is quite extraordinary what you can do in regards to that. And then of course there is this additional thing. You are floating in salt, and that itself is going to add a level of protection, spiritual protection. It's of a kind of cleansing to you. When you climb out of the tank, you feel completely purified. You feel like it's sort of defragmented the hard drive, or removed negativity out of your energy field, you could say. So there is that part that adds a I feel like a safety net to the experience. But simply, purely on a mechanical level, what you can accomplish in the tank in regards to activate imagination, once you get the hang of it, once you get used to floating, and it is a skill, it does require some practice. And the good news is that if you have been doing active imagination, or if you've been working as a magician or someone who's been working with your imaginative faculties or your spiritual faculties, that skill set will immediately apply to your work in the tank. You will be in that tank with a massive advantage already. You will already be oriented, you will be well situated to get the best out of that experience. And I found some amazing things. I had some extraordinary experience with intentional pathworking. Now the second thing that I played around with, and this actually started by accident, was using the tank for spirit contact. And entering into the tank with the intention of contacting a particular being. And this came about by accident, actually, the first time it happened. I was in the tank and I'd been floating for an hour or something, and then I had this strange color. It often starts as a kind of color appearing, and as that color stabilized, I was aware of a scene. I could see that it struck me as being somewhere in the Persia or the Middle East. It was a village or a town that was in Persia or the Middle East. And as I the camera of my consciousness kind of zoomed down into that landscape, I became aware of a figure in white robes that reminded me of what felt like Christ. It looked a bit like Jesus, a bearded messianic figure of some sort. And I was just overwhelmed with a sense of love and kindness and a feeling that I'd met this person before. And I don't think it was Christ. I feel like this was maybe some other prophetic figure in the Middle East. I'm not going to go into that. I've got some theories. But what happened is I had that experience and I got out of the tank really moved by the force of that presence, the visceral feeling of having encountered another person in that void. And then subsequently this figure reappeared in other visionary states or other mediumistic states. This figure would reappear and communicate various things to me. And so I had somehow connected with a spiritual being in that space. And so it kind of got me thinking, maybe I could do this intentionally. Maybe there was a way of intentionally invoking maybe an angel or someone and initiating angelic contact. Now, I'm not going to waste your time and explain to you every single experience that I have in there, but I will say that what you could experiment with is, for example, taking the sigil of an angel or a sigil of another angelic intelligence and then memorizing that sigil. Of course, you need to know what the sigil is, and then entering into the tank and visualizing that sigil very lightly in the tank, just holding it in your consciousness very lightly. And just so that as you slip into that trance, that it acts as a kind of catalyst for the experience. And often what will happen is that the sigil will morph. It will change into a whole visionary encounter that hopefully brings you into contact with that being. Another approach that you can use is to take the name of that angel and gently repeat it to yourself, not straining, not trying too hard, because strain and effort will translate into the wrong kind of brain state. It will be a more concentrated state, which will take you take you out of that visionary mode. So you want to repeat that name subtly, very gently in your head. Just keep saying it over and over and over in a very hypnotic way, and so that it carries you down deeper and deeper and deeper into that trance. And then what often happens is that it will bloom into an encounter in the tank. You will have a vision, the figure will appear or a scene will appear. I won't spoil it for you. You'll have to see for yourself what happens. But see how this works for you. It's kind of like incubating a waking dream, you could say, and entering into that in a waking state. And of course there are parallels with this in the ancient world. In the Hellenic times there were temples in which had underground chambers, completely dark, where the initiates would go to have to go dream and receive visions from the deity of that temple, or otherwise there would be various rituals in the dark that would provoke mystical experiences. But often there was this element of being underground in the dark, and this is of course not to exclude Tibetan darkness yoga. There in Tibet there are various techniques that they use in the caves, in the dark and absolute dark, and I believe in India too, of course, because there is that historical connection between India and Tibet, where yogis would go into the absolute darkness of the cave for a certain length of time and create a sense of sensory deprivation in order to have yogic encounters, yogic experiences. And so this is like that, but on steroids. There are other possibilities, of course, and if you're interested, if you find this topic interesting, let me know and I'll post more about it. I don't know if this is going to resonate with you, but what I will say is that even if you don't want to use the tank in explicitly magical ways like I've suggested, pathworking or spirit contact, just as a tool of self-exploration, I'm surprised that I don't hear magicians talk about it more. You can usually find float centers in every major city. It's relatively affordable, and if you're into self-exploration and so on, it's a very beautiful, powerful, healthy, accessible thing. And I'm surprised that the occultists aren't all over this.